I've built a lot of things in my life: a multi-million-dollar construction firm, an unassailable financial legacy, and a family I would lay down my life to protect. But you know what? I never built a tolerance for a man who drinks your finest bourbon, mocks you in your own living room, and has the absolute audacity to call it an inheritance. I am talking about Preston Gallagher. I'll never forget the condescending weight of his hand clamping down on my shoulder during my son Cole's promotion dinner at a high-end Austin steakhouse. Preston didn't just lean in to whisper his arrogant philosophy privately. He raised his voice intentionally, making sure the entire table, including Cole's new corporate partners and industry peers, could hear every single word. "Come on, Art, lighten up a little," he smirked, his voice dripping with suburban entitlement. "Family shares everything. There's no need to hoard what's eventually going to the kids anyway." He was trying to paint me as a tight-fisted, archaic old patriarch in front of a room full of professionals, trying to bully me into a false sense of obligation. What his debt-ridden, country club-obsessed mind didn't know was that I didn't get angry. I got tactical. Weeks before he even put his hands on my jacket, I had already quietly initiated a legal and economic iron curtain. He thought he was playing me. He had no idea he was just reading the lines I wrote for him. Let me take you back to the warm August afternoon, when the illusion completely shattered. It was exactly 2:14 p.m. when I pulled onto the driveway of my second property, a luxury craftsman home overlooking Lake Travis, Texas. The house was sitting beautifully on a gentle hill, looking out over the water, positioned perfectly to capture the late summer sun. I had spent months remodeling it, and my property manager, Jane Holt, already had high-end corporate tenants lined up with premium applications. All I needed to do was walk the property one final time, take a few listing photos, and give Jane the green light. But as my truck came to a stop, my eyes locked onto three strange luxury vehicles completely blocking the entrance. A shiny Chevy Silverado with Kansas plates, a white GMC Yukon, and a silver Honda Accord squeezed tightly against the side fence. My garage door was thrown wide open. Preston hadn't just snuck in for a secret weekend getaway with my keys. He had hired a commercial moving crew to dump a massive storage container full of their old, heavy, moldy Midwestern furniture right into my garage, planning to store their junk indefinitely on my dime while they figured out how to escape their mounting debts back in Kansas. I turned off the ignition, stepped out of my truck, and walked through my own front door into a circus of pure disrespect. There were 6 people treating my hard-earned asset like a fully booked Airbnb they had zero intention of paying for. Preston Gallagher was lounging dead center in my favorite custom leather armchair by the panoramic window, his ankle crossed over his knee, completely at home. His wife, Meredith, had her shoes off, her bare feet tucked under her on my custom sofa, exuding the smug posture of a woman who decided this luxury estate suited her lifestyle just fine. But the true, unforgivable desecration was waiting for me on the pristine quartz kitchen counter. There stood my prized, ultra-rare bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 15-year-old bourbon, a bottle I had been meticulously saving for an extraordinary milestone that had not yet arrived. It had arrived now, just not for me. Preston had heavily drained the priceless liquid, and right in front of my face, he was pouring it into cheap red Solo cups for 2 complete strangers, his country club golf buddies from Overland Park, loudly boasting that he essentially owned the place, ever since his daughter married into the Vance estate. Welcome to Dad's ultimate payback. If you've ever built something with your own 2 hands, you know exactly why I refuse to let an uninvited leech treat my life's work like a winning lottery ticket. Do me a quick favor right now. Smash that like button, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Because trust me, this clinical Texas showdown is about to take you somewhere cold, calculated, and devastatingly permanent. Preston didn't flinch when I walked in. He didn't even have the basic decency to look remotely caught. Instead, his face broke into that wide, easy grin of a man welcoming a guest into his own home, and he let out a full, genuine, completely unguarded laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had done the math, liked the answer, and saw absolutely no reason to hide it. "Art, my man, we wondered when you'd show up," he said, waving his solo cup of my priceless bourbon like he was presenting the lake view to me. "Don't get your tie in a knot. Brooke gave us the key and said it was totally fine. Besides, It's going to be Brooke and Cole's house anyway once you pass down the inheritance, so we're basically just keeping the seats warm. Before I could even let that arrogance settle in the room, his wife, Meredith, chipped in pleasantly from the sofa, adjusting her posture like she already owned the place. We actually went ahead and canceled our short-term lease back in Kansas last week, she murmured casually, as if she were merely commenting on the weather. Brooke assured us you never use this lake house anyway, Art. It just makes financial sense for us to base the family expansion from here. Right there, the final piece of the puzzle clicked. This wasn't a sudden, spontaneous weekend stopover. It was a calculated, pre-planned family conspiracy to squat on my property permanently. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at Preston, then at Meredith, and spoke in a tone so quiet and level that the entire room instinctively leaned in to hear it. "I'm going to say this exactly once," I said, locking eyes with Preston. "This is my house, my deed, my name. I need every single person in this room and every vehicle in my driveway gone before I get back." I turned on my heel, walked out, and drove 4 blocks down to a Starbucks parking lot to call my son. When Cole answered, the concern in his voice was immediate. He admitted, with a heavy dose of guilt, that he had given Brooke a spare key months ago, but strictly so she could check on the property's winter plumbing while I was away. He had absolutely no clue her parents were planning a hostile takeover. But the true, insidious depth of the Gallagher's strategy didn't come to light until the following morning, when my property manager, Jane Holt, walked the house after they had reluctantly packed up and left. She found a stack of documents sitting inside the freshly opened mailbox. Preston hadn't just moved his furniture in, he had already submitted official utility transition notices. He had actively attempted to forward his personal mail, his Kansas vehicle registration, and a premium Costco membership directly to my Lake Travis address. The bastard was trying to establish legal residency overnight, setting an intentional paper trail to trigger Texas's complex tenant protection squatter laws, so it would take me months of costly court battles to evict them. That afternoon, sitting in the cabin of my F-150 with the air conditioning humming, I bypassed standard family channels and called Vance Sterling. Vance has been my asset protection attorney for nearly 2 decades. He is a legal shark who doesn't waste time asking how your weekend was. He gets straight to the part where assets are protected and threats are neutralized. I laid out the timeline, the forwarded mail, and the squatter setup. Vance didn't just prepare a standard eviction notice. He immediately initiated a comprehensive, deep-dive financial sweep on Preston Gallagher. 2 hours later, Vance called me back, his voice cutting through the speaker like ice. The audit revealed that Preston was completely drowning in over $250,000 of high-interest predatory business debt back in Overland Park, Kansas, and his corporate entities were on the verge of asset seizure. The entire extended family visit to Texas was a desperate, highly coordinated run to hide from Midwestern debt collectors. They wanted to shield themselves inside my unmortgaged high-value luxury property, using my hard-earned retirement asset as a free financial bunker, while leaving me to deal with the legal fallout. Vance cleared his throat on the line, and I could hear the rustle of legal pads. "Art," he said coldly, "they wanted a war over legal residency. Let's show them what a real Texas lockdown looks like." I refused to blow up my son's phone, and I refused to give Preston the satisfaction of a screaming match. Anger is loud, but clarity is silent, and I was operating with the cold, laser-focused precision of a man who had already moved 3 steps ahead. Following Vance Sterling's clinical playbook word for word, I bypassed all domestic channels entirely. I didn't warn Brooke, and I didn't consult Cole. Instead, I walked right into the Travis County Sheriff's Office and filed an official, explicit criminal trespass warning against Preston and Meredith Gallagher. I didn't just let the paperwork sit in a county database either. Vance arranged for a certified corporate courier to track Preston down the following morning. The courier marched straight onto the 18th green of an exclusive Austin golf club, where Preston was playing a round with a group of high-profile local developers he was desperately trying to impress. Right there, in front of his wealthy associates, the courier handed him the bright orange legal folder, forcing him to sign the receipt on record. Preston's face turned an immediate ash-gray crimson as he read the document, informing him that his next footstep on my Lake Travis property would result in an immediate, non-negotiable arrest. The tough guy country club illusion he spent years building shattered right there in the sand trap. But a trespass warning was only the floor. I needed a ceiling that would permanently crush any future claims of family usage or squatter rights. I called Jane Holt the same afternoon and told her to completely skip the standard public listing process. We needed to fast-track an ironclad commercial-grade lease immediately. Within 48 hours, I signed a strict multi-year residential contract with Ryan and Beth Hudson, a young executive couple backed by a Fortune 500 corporate tech housing guarantee, for exactly $2,850 a month. By executing this specific agreement, the Lake Travis Craftsman was no longer just a vacant, second-family home vulnerable to domestic squatter loopholes. It was now legally transformed into an active, high-revenue-generating commercial corporate asset, protected by strict interstate business statutes. If Preston or any member of the Gallagher clan so much as attempted to tamper with the locks or step past the gate, they wouldn't just be dealing with a messy family dispute or a lenient local sheriff. They would be committing a federal-level corporate disruption against an active commercial enterprise. The bunker they planned to hide their debts in had officially become a legal high-voltage fence. 6 days later, I attended our routine Sunday family dinner at Cole and Brooks' apartment, wearing the most perfect poker face I've ever put on. I ate the chicken, asked about Cole's work projects, and laughed right on cue when a joke was made. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, Brooke decided to casually test the waters. She cleared her throat, shifting slightly in her chair, and offered a carefully rehearsed, seemingly innocent comment. "You know, Art, my parents called me after they left the lake. They mentioned they just really loved that Lake Travis breeze. They said it reminded them of the good old days." The room went quiet. I didn't flinch. I didn't let a single muscle in my face tighten. I simply reached for the serving bowl, looked Brooke dead in the eye, and passed her the salad. "The breeze out there is truly spectacular, Brooke," I said, my voice completely smooth and level. "Which is exactly why I just locked in a lease with a lovely tech executive couple for the next 2 years. $2,850 a month, corporate guaranteed. Fantastic cash flow." I watched Brooke's fork freeze in midair, a piece of lettuce dropping right back onto her plate. Her eyes widened in absolute paralyzed shock as she sat there in the silence, realizing that her parents' entire relocation plan, their hidden debt bunker, and their dreams of a free luxury inheritance had just completely vaporized into thin air. Instead of staying in Austin to absorb the inevitable shockwaves of the family fallout, I chose to completely ghost them. I had no desire to engage in emotional debates or listen to defensive tears. I packed a single leather duffel bag, left my house immaculate, and boarded a one-way flight out to Scottsdale, Arizona. But I didn't just physically distance myself. I took the psychological pressure to a clinical level. The moment my flight touched down in the desert, I completely disabled my primary phone line. I cut off every direct route of communication, routing all incoming calls and inquiries exclusively through the office of Vance Sterling. If Preston, Meredith, or even Brooke wanted to reach me, they had to go through a cold, unyielding wall of senior corporate counsel. This sudden, total digital blackout sent the Gallagher clan into a state of absolute blind panic. They were left stranded in a vacuum of information, completely unable to gauge my anger, predict my next move, or figure out how much of their squatter scheme had actually been exposed. While they were drowning in uncertainty back in Texas, I was checking into a luxury desert resort, letting the dry Arizona heat wash away the residue of their disrespect. On my third morning, sitting by the pool, as the sun cast long, sharp shadows across the terracotta stone, I picked up a pen and bought a single, elegant postcard featuring the stark, beautiful Arizona landscape. I addressed it directly to Cole and Brooks' home in Austin. The message I penned on the back was deceptively simple, written in my signature calm handwriting. "Taking some time in the sun. The Lake Travis house is sold. Everything is structured. See you Saturday at 1:30 p.m. Art." I dropped it in the mail and let the psychological clock start ticking. Brooke, who possessed a sharp intellect inherited from a much more competent side of her family, understood the devastating subtext the exact moment she turned that card over. I hadn't just leased the Lake Travis house to tech executives. I had quietly, unilaterally liquidated the entire multi-million-dollar asset on the open market. By selling the property completely, I had permanently erased the very foundation of her parents' financial rescue plan. But my time in Scottsdale wasn't just about relaxation and postcards. It was about tracing the full extent of the cancer they had introduced to my family. While I enjoyed the quiet desert evenings, Vance Sterling's team was conducting an exhaustive financial audit on my son's joint accounts. What Vance uncovered was a betrayal that turned my blood cold. 6 months prior, Preston had manipulated Brooke into quietly co-signing a $40,000 high-interest bridge loan for his failing Kansas business, using the joint savings account she shared with Cole as unverified collateral. Her family's toxic liabilities were now actively bleeding into my son's financial security, threatening to drag him down into Preston's bankruptcy vortex. I didn't hesitate for a single second. Using a fraction of the liquid cash proceeds from the immediate sale of the Lake Travis house, I instructed Vance to quietly buy out that specific debt note directly from the predatory lending bank. By noon on Wednesday, the bank was paid in full, the collateral on Cole's account was permanently released, and the legal ownership of the debt shifted. I had effectively become my own daughter-in-law's primary debt holder. Preston Gallagher thought he could use my family to hide from his creditors. He had no idea that I now owned the very leash around his neck. Saturday arrived at exactly 1:30 p.m., bringing with it the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that only exists right before a storm breaks. Cole and Brooke walked into my Austin dining room, their movements stiff, carrying the exhausted energy of people who had spent the last 48 hours trying to decode a postcard they couldn't understand. The room was staged with clinical precision. Vance Sterling was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table, his heavy black leather briefcase popped open, flanked by neat, intimidating towers of high-grade legal bond paper. I chose not to take the seat of authority. Instead, I sat at the absolute opposite end of the table, leaning back with a cup of black coffee, completely relaxed. I wanted the cold, majestic weight of that legal paperwork to do every single bit of the heavy lifting. The moment Brooke's eyes darted from the open briefcase to the unreadable expression on my face, she began to visibly tremble. The realization hit her like physical violence. This wasn't a tense family lunch designed for air-clearing excuses. This was a clinical, corporate restructuring of her entire reality. The room remained dead quiet as Vance Sterling put on his glasses, skipped the introductory small talk entirely, and began reading the new estate terms in a rhythmic, unhurried courtroom monotone. The financial proceeds from the immediate liquidation of the Lake Travis estate had not been deposited into a standard family account. They had been legally locked inside a highly complex, irrevocable generation-skipping trust. Cole was designated as the sole, absolute beneficiary of the Vance lineage, inheriting every single dollar, but the asset protection came tied to one brutal, non-negotiable condition. Vance leaned forward, his voice cutting through the room like a razor blade, as he read the specific spousal exclusion clause. For Brooke to ever have a single cent of legal access to, benefit from, or marital claim on the Vance wealth, she was legally required to execute a strict, ironclad postnuptial agreement drafted by entirely independent counsel. If she refused to sign, a poison pill provision would instantly activate, causing 100% of the estate to completely bypass Cole during his lifetime and flow into a restricted legacy fund reserved exclusively for my unborn grandchildren. The clause was an absolute economic iron curtain, ensuring Brooke's parasitic family would remain permanently locked out of my life's work forever. Brooke stared at the legal bond paper as Vance slid it across the wood, her face moving through a rapid, involuntary sequence of raw emotion. First came the blinding shock of total defeat, then a flash of defensive anger, and finally, to my absolute confirmation, a strange, profound wave of genuine relief, as the impossible burden her parents had placed on her shoulders was forcefully stripped away. She looked down the length of the table at me, realizing in that exact second that I knew every single thing about her father's financial manipulation. That was when Vance Sterling dropped the final, devastating hammer. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a separate blue folder, and slid it directly toward her. It was the original $40,000 promissory note I had bought out from the predatory bank in Kansas. "Your father is never going to manipulate you into draining my son's future again, Brooke," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and entirely devoid of malice. "Your liability is with me now, And I am forgiving this debt in full today, on the record, on one absolute condition. Your parents never cross my property line again. Cole didn't hesitate. He reached across the table, his hand locking firmly and protectively over his wife's trembling fingers, realizing his father hadn't come to destroy his marriage. I had come to build an impenetrable fortress around it. 7 weeks after that fateful dining room inquest, the dust finally settled on the official record. Brooke walked into an independent counsel's office and voluntarily signed the post-nuptial agreement, completely severing her financial ties to her parents and choosing the man she loved over the parasites who raised her. But Preston Gallagher wasn't going down without a desperate, pathetic fight. Catching wind of the impending signing, he boarded a last-minute flight and attempted to fly back into Austin to forcefully disrupt the execution of the paperwork. He thought he could pull another fast one. Instead, the moment he stepped off the jet bridge at the gate, he was blocked by a private security detail hired by Vance Sterling. Standing shoulder to shoulder in the terminal, they served him an active, court-ordered restraining order, legally backed by the Travis County Sheriff's criminal trespass log from his stunt at Lake Travis. Escorted immediately back to the ticket counter, Preston realized his intimidation tactics were entirely useless in the state of Texas. He was sent packing on the next flight out, a defeated man who had officially run out of moves. Meanwhile, the reality of total excommunication set in back in Overland Park, Kansas. Preston Gallagher now spends his mornings sitting alone in his kitchen, staring blankly into his lukewarm coffee, realizing he has been permanently erased from the Vance lineage. The silence in his house is deafening, but the true, surgical psychological blow arrived when he opened his laptop. Because our financial maneuvers are public corporate record, Preston was forced to watch online as Miller Creative Group and the Vance estate utilized the remaining liquid cash from the Lake Travis sale to purchase a brand-new, multi-million-dollar commercial plaza right in downtown Austin. It is a premier asset, a powerhouse of commercial real estate that will generate compounding, generational wealth for Cole's future children. It is an empire of prosperity that Preston's bloodline can log in and look at any time they want, but a fortune they will never, ever be allowed to touch. He wanted a lottery ticket. Instead, he got a front-row seat to the legacy he traded away for a red Solo cup of stolen bourbon. On Friday evening, I stood out on the terrace of my new penthouse, listening to the magnificent, steady sear of a prime ribeye steak on my Traeger grill. The Texas skyline stretched out before me, vast, amber, and completely indifferent to the petty greed of desperate men. I poured a glass of my premium bourbon, letting the rich warmth of it match the absolute serenity in my chest. I looked down at the new corporate folder resting on the patio table. I hadn't just forgiven Brooke's debt. Vance had structured the paperwork so that the accumulated interest from that bought-out note was redirected to establish a fully funded, permanent college endowment fund in Cole's name. I had built a fortress around my family, saved my son's marriage from the inside out, and taught an arrogant man a lesson that would echo through his bank accounts for the rest of his days. Laughing in the wrong man's living room turned out to be the most expensive mistake Preston Gallagher ever made. If you respected this masterclass in clinical asset protection and family justice, do me one quick favor. Smash that like button, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and make sure you are subscribed to Dad's Ultimate Payback. We have plenty of raw, high-stakes, and calculated stories waiting in the vault, and you won't want to miss a single drop. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next one.